Welcome to another episode of the Boxless World podcast, where we talk with guests redefining approaches to business and life, a space where we explore what happens when we stop accepting the way things have always been and start asking what better could actually look like. Today's guest is someone I've wanted to sit down with for a while. Rob Pierre, formerly of Jellyfish, who stewarded its growth to a global organization with thousands of people across the world. Rob, welcome. Before we talk about business, who is Rob Pierre? You spent much of your childhood in Trinidad before settling to the UK.
I did.
I'm really interested to know about how those early environments shaped you and shaped the way you approach life.
Well, I mean, anybody that's lived in the Caribbean or know what it's like, I mean, there are entrepreneurs everywhere. The hustle is real, and I was around it a lot. So growing up, I didn't really know by osmosis. I was learning, but around people using the resources they had in the most creative way possible, providing a service, identifying a demand, and doing their best to make a living. And so it didn't really have the infrastructure and the support that you might get here in the UK. So to cut a long story short, I was born here in the UK, but then my whole childhood was in Trinidad. I went there at the age of 4, came back here when I was 14. So through those informative years, I suppose I learned what it's like to problem solve and to try and understand what customers' needs or where there's a gap in the market, and try to produce a service or product that caters for that demand. And so I'd say, it had a big influence on the way I approached business and life in general. It's definitely a big, big influence.
Yeah, that kind of hustle mentality is, the way you've described it is, I think it's the right word for it. It's kind of by any means necessary. And I think sometimes when we talk about hustle mentality, people look at it in a negative light in terms of perhaps there's a perception that there's something grey or risky about it. But actually what you're saying to me is that hustle mentality is a hunger, if you like, that perhaps we don't see as much of here because, one may say that things are easier for people to grasp, but whereas in the Caribbean or other spaces where resources aren't as easy to access, that hunger needs to come from kind of a different place and be more creative.
Exactly. I mean, I think what nurtures the best entrepreneurs are nothing to lose, people with nothing to lose. That's the point. So actually starting a business when you're living at home, or you haven't got a job, or you've been made redundant, and all of these type of life scenarios creates a situation where you think, well, I might as well try. I've got nothing else to turn to. And then, it's the risk of losing that often is the barrier to people trying something. And the passion levels. It's if everything's very neutral and vanilla, it doesn't create the levels of passion that you need to make something successful. All of the resilience required. You got to love it. It's no different to families.
Absolutely.
No matter what your children do, it's amazing. The love meter doesn't move. You have to deal with all the challenges, all the trials and tribulations, and you go through these peaks and troughs. But the one thing that never moves is that love meter. And so I think business and family is, you can look at it exactly the same way.
Yeah, I like that. I like that term, the love meter. I'm going to steal that one.
All yours. Just TM it, Rob.
I will. So 14, that's very formative years of your life. Coming to the UK and kind of inserting yourself into a new education system, a new society, kind of what were the things that stood out to you most that, were really, really different? And of course, we'll put the weather to one side.
Well, and smells. If you're going to put the weather to one side, the smell. It seems ridiculous, but you come and just all of your senses are experiencing something new. So the weather definitely, but the privilege, and I know there are areas in the UK, so you could never make such a broad statement, but I happen to have come into Surrey and noticed that there was a lot of privilege, and people, are quite defensive when you use the word privilege, but everything from the NHS, clean streets, school, the education, the facilities, having an indoor basketball court, which is all
Mm,
things that people would take for granted. And I'm looking around going, this is incredible, literally incredible. And you can get on a bus and it's air conditioned, or you don't even need air conditioning. And I mean, the list goes on. So I would say, coming here, the contrast was stark, but I could see opportunity. I can see, even though I was different and I had the thickest Trinidad accent when I first came into St. Pete's School in Red Hill in Surrey, but I was notably different, but I was full of hope, ambition, passion, excitement. I really saw that there was a future, and my mum brought me over. And as I said, I was born here, but then brought us over and made sure that, for education and that, we can benefit from the fact that we were British citizens, etc. And I thank her for that. And yeah, so I would say a lot was different, but the biggest thing was opportunity.
okay. Okay. I'm going to fast forward slightly to you starting your working career pre Jellyfish.
hmm
Just talk to us a little bit about kind of those experiences and how that started to build you up towards entering into that space.
Yeah, so I think I've said it a few times. Retail, what a stepping stone for business acumen. What a way to learn all aspects of how to run and thrive in a business. You get so much responsibility and accountability at such a young age, and you're responsible for the merchandising, the P&L, hiring, firing, um, everything from sales, training. It's unbelievable. The foundations it builds, and so it wasn't the route I thought I was going to take. I applied to IBM to do a computer studies degree. Did all the assessments, was accepted on the course. Didn't read the small print, which was pending your A-level results. I subsequently went on to fail physics A levels. They retracted the space. I had no plan B, so I went into retail. But what I realized is that I loved it. And I loved being given the accountability, and I loved experimenting, cause and effect, test, analyze, refine, do something, see how the results, measurement. It was like that whole mix of creativity, but also quite a logical, pragmatic, analytical mind mixed with the ambition and the almost the obsession with doing things differently, trialing something, trying to find that cutting edge and that little 1% that could make you competitive in the marketplace, or just get those extra marginal gains in every aspect of business. So that ended up being like a puzzle. It was almost recreational as I was in this store. Running it and trying to get better results, and actually having that score at the end of the day, whether it's how many of the premium sunglasses you sold, or what were the number of units per transaction, what was the average transaction value, how could you exploit each flight that comes through and merchandise your store differently, how do you put the best sellers at eye level to make sure that you have deep inventory in the ones that are selling, how do you make sure that everybody that you've got are excited to converse with customers. We played games, we had, it's not unique, but it's unusual that a lot of people do these type of games within a retail store. But we had words that you had to inject into your conversation, and so you had to be really creative with how you took the conversation and engaged with the customers. But yeah, we had KPI tables. And because we were an airport store, on New Year's Day, you started at 5 in the morning. Who, what young person wants to start at 5 in the morning on New Year's Day after the New Year's Eve night? So for 3 months on the run up to that, we had a KPI table, and the last two on the table did that shift. It's just incentives,
Mm,
gamification, um, analyzing, testing, refining your processes, getting that mixture right. I loved it. And I realized that, it complemented a lot of probably the nurture, not, sorry, the nature in me. And it complemented my skills and my passions. And I ended up being quite successful. So what was a stopgap ended up being the start of my career. And I ended up going from a store assistant manager in a store all the way through to leading the sales operations and marketing for the European division of Sunglass Hut. And that all started with just oh, I better get a job and figure out what my plan B was going to be.
Yeah, a bit of destiny in there. Maybe a stupid question, but do you ever look back and think, what if I'd got the A level result and gone on to do that IBM course?
Yes, but yeah, you know what it's like. It's you watch those movies where you go back in the past and you change one little thing and everybody's
Yeah.
different and everything. I don't want my life to change. Why would I look back with any form of regret? So yeah, you're right. I think I'm spiritual, not religious, so I'm not sure there's a higher being that dictates what happens, but I think that how you embrace all of these different pivots and scenarios that you've got to work through. I think life is random. I think things happen to
Mm.
you. It's not all karma. It's not all prescribed path and route. I think things will happen, and happiness is reality minus expectation. And my expectation is that life is random, and good things will happen, bad things will happen, and sometimes, to your point, what you think is a bad thing isn't a bad thing. I mean, anybody listening, go out and look at the Chinese farmer story, and it's an old fable or whatever, but it talks about the fact that when things happen, some people could perceive it as a bad thing, but this Chinese farmer just said, well, maybe could be good, could be bad, and of course, every scenario, what looks bad ends up being good, and everything that's good ends up being bad. It's like one of those things. So I think we just need to take the cards we're dealt, the circumstances, the random nature of how life can throw things at you, and it's how you deal with them. And if your expectation is that they're going to happen, it allows you to live in the moment and to enjoy things when things are going well and to just deal with the challenges as they come in life. So, yeah, that's kind of how my outlook on things.
Perception is really important. That whole kind of half glass, half empty thing. It really kind of dictates how you show up in those moments when good or bad things happen. And I'm a very firm believer in you make your own luck. And I feel like the harder you work, the luckier you get is definitely true. And kind of that braveness, if you like, to say yes to many things, not knowing if they could be good or couldn't, is kind
Mm,
of where in my experiences, have found that's where often success comes from. Because I'd go, I'm not really sure if I want to do this, or I'm not sure if I want to meet with this person, but I do it. And then you go, wow, I'm so glad that I took that opportunity and that chance, because look what it's led to.
completely. That's where the saying comes, more is lost from indecision than wrong decisions. You
Mm.
could pivot out of a wrong, if you mitigate the risk, you could go into something and you could always say this hasn't worked, but a lost opportunity. That's like, staff and performance. A lot of people are so scared of doing what we're describing because people are fired or judged on mistakes. No one's judged on the opportunity missed. So you create a workforce that all feel being safe, staying out of trouble, not doing anything risky is the best course of action. But it obviously isn't. I think that a lot of us miss opportunities simply because we don't go out and give it a go and try. So yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more.
100%. You've conveniently segued onto another area that I really want to touch upon with you, which is people. So we haven't worked together, but our introduction to one another actually was through good people, who perhaps felt somewhere someday we might connect the dots on something, or with some others. So it's with people that I'm really interested to start having some conversation with you, because when you build something like Jellyfish at that scale, how do you keep the right people and bring along the right people at the right time?
Yeah. I mean, I was in a meeting the other day and somebody was talking about, they've created a culture playbook. And I thought, oh no, they've sat in a room and they've put together a playbook of what they think the culture will be. And then they send that out to the team. And this is now our culture. I'm like, goodness, culture is a symptom. And in order to create a culture, you've got to get the fundamentals within that formula right. And I think the formula are pretty much people multiplied by environment, multiplied by values, multiplied by purpose, pretty much. And so articulating a purpose that everybody is passionate about and want to be part of and want to go on that journey with you, that's the fundamentals. And then with that, the people that go on that journey with you exhibiting the right values. You just got to hire based on values. People can learn, people have great superpowers, but we also got to remember that every bright superpower casts just as big a shadow. And so you
Mm.
can't be good at everything. And the better you are at one thing often makes you even worse at another. You could get all of these generic vanilla, like I say, jack of all trades. But what team, if you imagine like a football team, if you had everybody that could be a goalkeeper, but could also be a striker, and you had 11 players that could play anywhere on the field, or had a team full of the specialists in their areas, once you've got the common purpose and the direction, the communication and the training, then obviously we all know which team will perform better. But you've got to accept that the striker is not going to be maybe as tall or as agile or as have the same ability. So don't judge them on how many goals they let in practice. So that type of mentality is what I took forward, and trying to establish who has the values, what are their superpowers, how could we get them doing what they do best 95% of the time, but in a team environment where whatever shadows cast, they're compensated. The only way you could get rid of darkness is with light. So when you're casting a shadow, then get somebody who's brilliant and that's their shining superpower, and then put you back to back. And that's how you get the type of performance that we started to get out of Jellyfish. Accountability, and when I talk about environment, it's not just the physical environment. It's the processes. It's how do the right values manifest themselves in a work environment. And that is those behaviors create an environment where people feel that they can take those risks. They can seek opportunity because they're not going to be um, left out to dry if it doesn't go the way that you expect. Being collaborative, all of us against the problem, all of us trying
Mm.
to exploit the opportunity, all benefiting together, not trying to suppress others to elevate yourself within the organization. So people get the right people who have a common passion, agree with the purpose, exhibit the right values, give them the accountability, make sure that your team formation has complementary skills, get the best, get them doing what they do best 95% of the time. And actually, it doesn't become a very complicated formula. It really does start to um, become a weapon, a business weapon, a team that, Patrick Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions of a Team. That's one of the books that I used for all of our inductions and, to try to make sure that our environment was the right one to create the right culture as a symptom. So yeah, I would say that's and I truly believe it. And you may hear it in my voice, that it's something
Mm.
I miss tremendously. The team and what we were doing and how we did things differently, and that the fact that everybody knew we were extremely competent, brilliant, creative, um, market leading, but we were nice, collaborative people with similar values. And that's what people really remember about Jellyfish. And most of our partners and clients, that's what they would say. And I know it's not unique, but then I don't believe in USPs in the current form of the acronym where everyone says they say unique selling points. I just think you need a load of unusual selling points to be unique. And that's what we did. Nothing we did was unique, but we did a lot of unusual things where most businesses can't quite get it right. And when you do a lot of those, you end up with something quite special.
I really like that reframing from unique to unusual, because I think one of the challenges now is creating that sticky differentiator. There's so many carbon copies of things, And it's not to say that for an organization that is looking up to another organization that's had success, that isn't the right path to follow. But if you are just a carbon copy, it's very, very difficult then to create those unusual or sticky differentiators that create that culture and environment that you're looking for, that separates you and makes you who you are. And I think that's really, really important. This you've spoken about before, and I'm fascinated by this. For one, the distribution of responsibility at Jellyfish, you had quite a unique approach where you allowed anyone to kind of put their hand forward for tasks, for ideas. Just talk us through that, because for me that is an unusual selling point, and I'm just fascinated by how you were able to orchestrate that.
Yeah. So and it was actually because anybody that knows the project management system, the RACI model, which is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, we kind of thought that accountable and responsible should be the same thing. Because unfortunately, most pyramid hierarchies in organizations, somebody has the accountability for it to be delivered, but they give the responsibility to someone else. And guess what happens in those scenarios?
Yeah,
When it
lower
goes
down the
to
pyramid.
Yeah, exactly. When it goes to plan, guess who takes the credit? The one
Always the
who's
top.
accountable. But when it goes
Yeah.
wrong, who gets the blame? Always the person responsible for delivering it. And we thought, no, in actual fact, if you believe someone is the right person to take on a task or an initiative, then they take full accountability to the extent that they don't get somebody else to sign it off before it's done, etc. If they're the right person, and the brief is very clear and it's articulating how articulated how they're contributing to the project or the team, and that they're given the accountability. They are the mini CEO of that accountability. You're giving them the parameters to work within, they can make decisions, and then suddenly all of these friction points, like any engine, you got to eradicate the friction points. Loads of time, this communication and back and forth. Imagine, I'm sorry, I'm not even that much into football, but it sounds like it because I'm going to use another football analogy. Imagine a striker is running towards the goal and is thinking, do I chip the goalkeeper or do I put it in the bottom right corner? And then he turns around to the manager to wait and get a signal. What should I do? Which one should I? No.
Missed opportunity.
Missed opportunity. So they're trained. You know the parameters that you're working in. You know the goal that you're trying to achieve. You're accountable for scoring that goal. Make the decision. Get it done. The training and everything and the brief, and that's all done before when you're actually operating. So that mindset that everybody would take on accountability, it meant that it didn't matter how senior you were, because it's likely the parameters that you're working within, the budget, the strategic nature of the initiative, whatever, that's going to be that's going to have it's going to be synonymous with your level of seniority. That's the point. But whatever your task, if you did end up being accountable, you can get on with it. And so we did that. And so, people didn't have bosses. They had support networks. It was very clear. We had a thematic goal for the company, which led to the primary objectives, which were then defining objectives for each department. Each of those objectives turned into a number of initiatives. Those initiatives were made up with a bunch of tasks, but every single person was accountable for one of those initiatives, and only one person is accountable for that initiative. And out of the, let's say, 100 most senior people in Jellyfish, I had one database where every single one of the initiatives, which laddered up to every one of our defining objectives, which laddered up to our company primary objectives, I knew who was accountable for delivering that initiative. And so I could talk to them directly. And there's no layers, there's no game of telephone where it all gets lost in translation, or they've got to come back to me, and there's just a whole bunch of inefficiency, friction in the engine. I could just go straight to the person who's accountable. I'm having the exact same amount of conversation and time, but everybody is getting exposure to me. I'm getting exposure to them. I'm learning what they're doing. They feel heard. They feel
Ah,
seen. They feel recognized for the contribution that they're making. And so all of a sudden, you're using probably less time to get everybody involved, to be able to influence people with your level of passion and excitement for what we're doing, to put everything in context for them. Because my accountability, one of them wasn't to know everything that was going on. It was to know where we're heading and to be able to articulate that and to be able to say to somebody, this is how your contributions are going to play out and add benefit to our strategic initiatives or our strategic direction as a company. And so it just meant that it was working so much better. And this is very difficult. I mean, I'm flippantly saying it, very difficult to achieve. And like you said, was one of the very unusual things that we had for a business with thousands of people, 2,200 people in 26 countries, all working together in this way was very difficult. People got promoted by submitting a business case where they personally articulated what they were doing, what over and above what they considered their role to be. So they were creating their own development plans, and every time they did something, in their minds, they were going, well, this is going to form my business case to get a promotion. So it better add value. There better be a value exchange. I better be able to articulate that I've added more value to the company. So they didn't just do things for the sake of it. And they were doing things that they were measurable, and they made sure they were able to articulate how they could contributed to the business. And all of a sudden, everybody's doing that. And you haven't got bosses policing all the unconscious bias that's in a business, all the people who are threatened by ambitious people who are achieving great things, suppressing people around them, all of that sort of normal company corporate dynamics that in a pyramid hierarchy that causes these friction points, we started to eradicate with this system. And it worked really well.
I think from my experience, there's something quite majestic when you mix trust with creative license, and that sort of empowerment that you provide someone to kind of go. And you talk about accountability, like, go, you do it. We believe in you. We trust you. I think there's something quite magical about what that can bring out in people. But as you say, I run a small business. It's really difficult sometimes to let go and give that trust to someone, knowing that, a lot depends on it, a lot counts on it. So I've seen it myself when I've been in those positions where I've been empowered. My best work's delivered because I know that there's belief and there's trust in what I'm doing.
And I guarantee you didn't always do it the way the person who's giving you that accountability, you haven't done it the way they would do it. And the problem is, when you don't do it the way they did it, in their minds, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Because you didn't do it the way they would do it. And so you go back to this scenario where you've got to acknowledge that sometimes there are better ways. And even initially, it doesn't look like the right way, but it could turn out to be the right way. And then you could only learn and expand your own understanding when you're experimenting, test, analyze, refine, all of that stuff. And so, yeah, it's amazing. And velocity, trust, momentum, creativity far outweighs the odd, what you could argue are mistakes. But I go back to sometimes what looks like a mistake. Some of the best inventions in the world were off the back of a mistake or an accident, So
yeah. That balance, I think, many founders and business owners will kind of acknowledge this. The balance between control and trust. When do you relinquish control? When do you give full trust to something? Kind of in your experience, and certainly at Jellyfish, when things were growing at scale, at what point were you, was that with good people taking on more control and you providing more trust, or was there a kind of particular moment where you felt that you could step back from more things?
I think it was just, it was inherent. I mean, because it's a massive ego, because I don't know why we're afforded to, just because we're the ones who started the business. So we're allowed to learn on the job and experiment and we're trusted. We trust ourselves implicitly. The reason we trust ourselves implicitly is because we know that we're problem solvers, and that when something goes wrong, we'll go, oh, let me fix this and adapt. So I just don't understand why we afford ourselves all of this leeway and ability to learn and to grow, and no one else is. It doesn't make any sense. So once you overcome that and realize that everybody's learning, and I use, it's exactly like parenting. We all know, we've all have parents, and we've had parents, and we know parents, and we got friends who are parents. there's no book, there's no
There's no
lesson,
manual.
no
Yeah.
manual. It's just like what we're doing is that we're using all of our experience and our skills, and some of us are better at some areas than others, and that we've got to be kept in check, and you've got to try and work in partnership if you can, your life circumstances allow you to do that, but leverage your family, learn and just keep adapting and do your best, and so just taking all of this mindset, you realize that, geez, you really should let go of a lot of things, because what makes you the best? What makes you the one that knows exactly how to do it? And then when you start hiring people who are got different levels of expertise, that's where we go back to. If you're accountable, you're the mini CEO, because you've been given that job. And loads of people who are not as senior, according to a pyramid hierarchy, know so much more about so many things than I do. It's just because of the seniority doesn't now make you the fountain of
The
all
expert.
knowledge. You know what I mean? The experts on
Absolutely.
everything. So, you've got to accept that, acknowledge it, embrace it, celebrate it. And that's how you get the best performance out of people.
I love that. Rob, we've got time for one more question, and this is possibly going to be quite a difficult question. Well, it has been for others, but the whole idea behind Boxless and consulting with organizations to try and take different approaches with structures, their assumptions, and just how their kind of business operates. What is the one box you think the business world desperately needs to break out of right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke about it. I kind of gave the answer. I think the traditional setup of companies, I think the restrictions that come with the perception of seniority and how people progress and what makes you good at your job and how you contribute. I think holding on to the fact that you have to be either a manager or a leader, you have to have teams beneath you. All terminology I don't like, as you can imagine. But
Mm-hmm.
I think holding on to what makes you senior, just the fact that they're having bets on what would be the first unicorn one person company. There's so many different ways to approach how you set up and grow a company now. I think the pyramid hierarchy is the one that companies need to break out of.
I love that. Yeah, we often talk about the inverted pyramid when we're speaking with some of the clients that we work with, in the sense that, canvassing the bottom of the pyramid or the top when we invert it is where you'll find the most outlandish ideas. And as you wash them through the middle of the pyramid, where you have, the managers and individuals in an organization that have been identified as fit for leadership roles, they get sanity checked, so that by the time they reach the decision makers at the peak of the pyramid, they're in the right format for the decision makers to be able to take forward. And I think when we have that traditional hierarchy of pyramid, often it's those at the top deciding what the many want, and they're not in touch. They're out of touch with what the many want. So I really like just taking the pyramid and just completely,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
putting it.
I would press it even more, and I'd just say,
just rip it apart and
rip it apart. I mean, the pyramid,
yeah,
it's much more three-dimensional. It's much more organic, and that when you've got people with all the different accountabilities at every level, it's hard to visualize. It's like quantum physics, where suddenly they're telling you, well, it could be a one and a zero and everything in between. And he's like, well, I don't even know where to go with this. I just don't understand. I think if you haven't operated and created the operating system, it's hard to imagine how that would work. But yeah, you can't even, there's not even a pyramid there to invert, or however you described it.
yeah,
That would be my argument.
Brilliant. Rob, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been fascinating to hear your approach. I think there's a lot of insight there for our listeners to take away, and also a few authors and book titles that you shared as well, which we'll drop into the comments. But Rob, thanks for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And I'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks, bud. Keep up the great work as well. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.